I would hope, and I know it can happen, that black intellectuals have been separated from the masses of our people. The masses of our people are going steadily downward because there's no connect between the learned of our people and the suffering masses of our people. There has to be a covenant made between those of us who have been blessed with knowledge, blessed with wealth, blessed with opportunity, to unite the best of our minds and the best of our pocketbooks to pool our resources to develop a programmatic thrust that will lift us and our people out of the condition that they're in. The last thing I want to say.
There is a saying that goes, you have to know where you are coming from to understand where you are going. There is something I have come to understand since I started this channel, and which is whatever we are discussing today or we are talking about today has already been talked about or discussed years back. I've come across some interesting videos from some great African Americans which I find it very interesting. I want us to watch this particular video. I will be back.
And we got to be clear about what the starting point is. The starting point is there's too much black social misery in the world and in the country. Too many folks suffering, they ought not be suffering. So we got to keep the focus there. Then the question becomes, how do we get clarity of vision, quality of service, but preserve our sense of history? Because the present is history. And you're looking at history. Look at the quality of spokesperson on this thing. Look at this. Look at this. Thanks to this brother right here. But the issue's bigger than us. And the question is, how do we bring together the political leadership that's courageous, the spiritual leadership that knows how to speak to issues of death and dread and despair, and the economic leadership that knows how to engage in entrepreneurial creativity, and then the ordinary folk with all of their riches and their unbelievable creativity and the music and what have you. So we need a division of labor. We got to respect each other enough that we accent the different geniuses and contributions that we make so our egos don't get in the way of the struggle of the people.
Reverend Al, you and I both love sports, and because I live in LA, I know this all too well, that if you're going to win the NBA championship, you need a good inside game and a good outside game, and since Shaq ain't in town no more, we ain't going to win in LA this year, I can guarantee you that. That said, because you need a good inside and outside game, Dr. West, on the outside, if you will, in academia, you decided to go on the inside this last time around, and I said respectfully, as a presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket. Tell me what you make now, having run for president, of the notion, the idea of a contract with black America. What do you make of the idea?
Well, I think that before we can honestly talk about a contract with black America, we need to have contact with each other. I think that the real problem is that not enough of us are talking to each other. And if we had unity among the leadership,
go ahead, Reverend,
around the things that we can agree, we don't have to agree on everything.
Yeah.
But if we came together on what we agreed on, then we could force a contract with America because we have a contact and an honor among ourselves. But we can't ask others to give us the respect we don't give each other. I think that's the first problem. I mean, the reality is we are here 40 years after the Pettus Bridge March, which brought us to where we could have elected officials. We're here 40 years after Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. We're here 10 years after the Million Man March. We had more contact 10 and 40 years ago than we do now. I don't have to agree with everything Bishop Long does, but he built this campus. We need to talk about that. Minister Farrakhan brought 2 million men together. Why are we not in contact with each other? while we can then go to this American public and leadership and make demands. Look at our conditions. While we run around here sound biting and ego tripping, our people are suffering. They need us in touch with each other.
Dr. Lowry, you are known in our circles as the dean of the movement. You're one of the last survivors of those who were around. You helped found SCLC.
I'm not that old.
I know you're not that old. I was just about to say that's a lot to accomplish in 28 years. That said, if you agree with Reverend Al, what we are trying to understand, certainly those of us in my generation, and I suspect those younger persons in this audience and those watching on television, is this ain't the first time we've heard somebody black say what Reverend Sharpton said, that we can't seem to get our leaders together. Now, we elect some of y'all, we appoint some of y'all, we still yet anoint some others. So we, the people, the black folk, have done our part. We have empowered y'all and lifted y'all up as our leaders. We expect you to do the work on our behalf. So we've done our part. Why aren't leaders, black leaders, doing their part, if you agree with Reverend Sharpton, to put together a contract of the things that we believe in? Where is the plan? And how responsible is leadership to making that happen?
Right on time. Right on time.
Just happen to have the plan right here in my pocket. Unfortunately, from one time out of a million, I do agree with Al. We've been waiting a long time to agree with each other. I agree with you, Al. She's growing. Let me say very seriously that I like the idea of the contract with America, except I'd like to nominate another term at covenant.
Covenant.
Rather than contract.
All right.
Because covenant introduces a spiritual, moral context. And I think that's our problem, that we have let other folks take the moral high ground. When the moral high ground was our status, that's how we turned back growling dogs and cow prodders and lynch mobs and jails. We translated jails into prayer cells because we had the moral high ground. We've got to now recapture that spirituality that gave us the strength. We have deserted the good spouse of spirituality, and we're shacking up with the prostitute of materialism and greed. And we've got to have a new birth of spirituality, because that's our strength. Our strength is not in the Republicans who not the Democrats. One takes it for granted, the other one just takes us. Our power is in the Creator and in each other, and that's a spiritual issue. And we need to have a revival of spirituality. And when we catch on fire, and when we see God moving in us and in each other, we can set America on fire, and we can have a covenant with America.
All right? I know that our special rapporteur, Raymond Brown, is taking notes. I hope you are as well. And I want you to feel the spirit of what we're doing here. This is a conversation. I didn't convene this because I have all the answers. It's a conversation about how we make this happen. And I think there is validity in us considering that phraseology, covenant, with black America, as opposed to contract. Y'all write this down? All right.
That's right.
Brother Minister, if you believe or if you agree with Reverend Lowry that somewhere along the way what we surrendered was the moral authority, how did that happen and how do we get it back? If you agree with that.
Thank you. First, let me say I'm honored to be here with this august panel and those that are sitting in the audience, and I'm honored to be in this blessed house built by my brother, Reverend Bishop Eddie Long. The thing that came to my mind when you used the word contract and my brother used the word covenant, a contract or a covenant is between parties who intend to make their word their bond. I think it is proper and right that we make a covenant with our people. For the scripture says, woe to the shepherd who feeds himself and not the flock. Should not the shepherd feed the flock? The problem a lot of times is a disconnect between leaders and the people. Because most of the leaders, the scripture says, have been hirelings that flee when the wolf comes. But the good shepherd will lay down his life for the sheep. I would hope, and I know it can happen, that black intellectuals have been separated from the masses of our people. The masses of our people are going steadily downward because there's no connect between the learned of our people and the suffering masses of our people. There has to be a covenant made between those of us who have been blessed with knowledge, blessed with wealth, blessed with opportunity, to unite the best of our minds and the best of our pocketbooks to pool our resources to develop a programmatic thrust that will lift us and our people out of the condition that they're in. The last thing I want to say, no matter what covenant we make with each other, we have to be careful of any contract or covenant with those who don't have a word that they keep. Ask the Native Americans about all the treaties that they signed. Ask about 40 acres and a mule. We just celebrated 50 years of Brown versus the Board of Education, but while we were celebrating the victory, they were planning to put us right back under segregation, and here we are again with voting rights bill and accommodation, public accommodation that many suffered to give us that right. Here, Reverend Jackson earlier this morning said in 2007 the voting rights bill could be turned out. So I'm leery about a covenant or a contract with a people who have no word. So I would advise, taking the lead from what Reverend Al and Reverend Lowry has said, let us make the right kind of covenant, and it is a hypothesis that was put before us by God himself. In these words, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal their land. That's the covenant.
y'all self, I ain't gonna get through this. If y'all don't behave yourself, I can't get through this. I know it's tough, ain't it? I know it's tough. Mayor Archer, I'm delighted that you were here because you were the only person on this panel, to my knowledge, who has been an elected official. Dr. Elders, we'll get to a little bit later, an appointed official as Surgeon General, but you were elected by the people. And in, quite frankly, the blackest city in America, Detroit. I love Detroit. Great city.
Right on, Detroit.
But you were elected by the people of Detroit, not once but twice, to be their mayor. I wonder what your thoughts are as one who was elected by the people. So you've been on the inside of the electoral process. You have been very much involved in Democratic Party politics at the national level. Talk to me about your honest assessment of this notion. I'm going to move to issues and specifics here in just a moment, but I want to just pick a few brains here about the notion, the viability, or the ridiculousness of this idea. Your thoughts, sir?
First, I want you to know that I think the only people who are very relieved at this moment that they do not have to follow what we've just heard is Reverend Jackson, Mike Dyson, and also John Conyers, who are sitting over there. Let me just say that from a perspective of having the concept that you introduce, I think it is most appropriate and it's long overdue, but I also think, because it is a conversation, that the thoughtfulness that has been set forth, starting with Cornel West and moving down to Reverend Al Sharpton, Dr. Laurie, and then of course by Minister Louis Farrakhan, is something that suggests to me that we should come together as a people.
Yes, sir.
To appreciate what it is that we want, lay out the game plan in terms of the issues that you'll reach, whether it's education, entrepreneurship, economics, all of the things that are very important, and then have the people come to us and to say, what is it they will do to earn and merit our vote? I don't think we are going to be able to create a contract that will allow somebody to come in and say, yes, I'll sign on to the dotted line because I agree with Minister Louis Farrakhan. We've heard a lot, we've seen a lot. I've been privileged to serve as mayor of the city of Detroit. I served for 6 years on behalf of the National Conference of Democratic Mayors. I enjoyed the working relationship that I had with President Clinton's administration. I saw what cities could do and how we could really make a difference. But I also saw what Mayor Coleman Young had to deal with the 8 years under President Reagan's administration, 4 years under President Bush's administration, Bush 1, when they came and told everybody who would vote for them that we're going to have less government, and cities suffered. And we saw what occurred. But then when President Clinton got in office, and there was an outreach, not only to those of us of color, but there was an outreach to the National Conference, or I should say the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who understood the needs of our citizens. I'm just suggesting the following. We should get our own house in order. Put down all of the, as we've heard the phrase before, leave the egos at the door, because I tell you, I've had an opportunity to meet one-on-one with most everyone that you've got on this panel and the next panel. These are men and women of great brilliance, of great contributions, who have an ability to reach out and to energize people. Witness the way in which our audience here today reacted when they first came in. They don't have the real egos. They've got a desire to make some things happen. It takes a lot from a Jesse Jackson and from a Al Sharpton to put their families and themselves on the line, as Shirley Chisholm did, to run for the office of president. It takes a lot for someone who is outspoken and stand up as Minister Louis Farrakhan happens to be, and say, you know, I think we ought to have a million-man march. Things can be done when we come together and make a difference.
Yes, sir.
All right, trying to talk to different people who represent different constituencies, as you can see, in talking first and foremost here about this notion. One other person who I want to get their thought on the notion of a contract or a covenant, if you will, and then I want to jump into the specifics in the time that we have before we make way for this second panel here. And again, today is just the start of this conversation about this idea. Jammu Green, you are the president of Rock the Vote. Rock the Vote does most of its work. Most of its work is geared toward, aimed at getting young people to register to vote, young people to engage themselves in the process, young people to understand that their destiny is tied to whether or not they're going to take control of their own destiny. But it's young people that you all focus in on. I asked you to be here today because I wanted to get your thoughts, given the work that you do, on why it is that so many young black folk are disconnected, disengaged from the process. I was in a conversation with some folk the other night, and what really came out of that conversation was it's not that these young folk necessarily don't care. God knows it's not that they're stuck on stupid. They're extremely bright. So many of them, I think, know that this democracy is dysfunctional. And as I said this morning, quoting Dr. West, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. You can't save the people if you won't serve the people. That's the point that Mr. Farrakhan made a moment ago. Somebody's got to see that you're willing to put your life out there, to take seriously their concerns. I don't know if that's the reason why so many young black folk are disconnected and don't trust the process, because they know it's dysfunctional. Tell me what you know and what you think they would think of. I'm not asking you to speak for all young black folk. I know you can't do that. But talk about the notion of this covenant or a contract and how young people might be impacted, what they might think of.
Well, I have to start by saying how honored I am to be sitting up here with, I would say, the people who are responsible for getting me interested in the political process. The careers and the leadership from everyone up here and in the audience is why I have tried to get other young people involved in the political process. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I think as far as the notion of the contract, I think that for young people, it is an absolute necessity because a contract has been taken out on young black America. From the politicians, from sometimes our elders, from the media perception. This generation is under attack, and unless we create our own contract and take our own contract out to protect the fact that healthcare, education, all of the issues facing this generation are a lot of times ignored because of some of the reasons you said. People think that they're disconnected, they don't care. When a young person has to pick up a rifle to be able to pay for a college education and fight in a foreign land, there's a contract on this generation. When we have young African American women coming under fire when it comes to the HIV crisis in our community, and the funding is not there and the education is not there. That is how a contract has been taken out on this generation. And so it is absolutely necessary that young people form a coalition, a covenant, a contract, a plan, a campaign, a strategy, whatever it is, to fight back against that. And I think that there are a number of issues within our community that have to be addressed as far as, is the leadership willing to allow these new young leaders, this next generation, to take their seat at the table? That question has to be answered.
Let me ask you right quick. What your assessment is in the work that you have done. You'd be a good person to ask. What's your assessment of whether or not they are in fact willing? I'm not even asking them to leave the room, and you're not asking them to leave the room. You're not asking them to give up their seat. What you said, I heard very clearly, was will they make room at the table for these young voices? What's your assessment of their answer to that question?
Well, I think by you having me on this panel is a very clear sign that there is a lot of openness to have young people's voices a part of the process. That openness is there in some cases. I would say it is not there in the majority of cases. I can only go from my personal experience. going to Washington, D.C., wanting to become a part of the political process, wanting to find mentorship. In a lot of situations, in 5 years working within the National Democratic Party politics, I was on my own. My peers were on their own. We did not have leadership in a way that opened up the doors and said, come sit here. This is your place. But I also hold young people responsible because the generation before us did not ask for permission. They did not have people who opened doors, and so we don't have to wait on that. It would be great if those doors were more open, but we have a responsibility where we cannot ask for permission to take that seat at the table. We have to step up and demand that seat at the table. And I think this generation has that within them. They have that, they do care, they see what is happening in their neighborhoods, in their communities, the attack that is coming to them, and they're willing and I think ready to make this fight. And hopefully we can do it together. If it doesn't happen as openly as we would like, I actually feel very hopeful that this generation is going to grab those reins.
All right. Thank you. Let me, now that I've gotten the conversation underway with some overviews of what people think or don't think, as it were, about this notion of a contract or a covenant, let me try to advance the conversation and start talking about some issues. And we're going to move from issues to talking about process. And again, this is the first conversation we've had on this. We're not going to get it all done today. There's another panel coming. They won't get it all done. But we're going to do the work in the work that really needs to be done. It's easy to get us together when the cameras are on. I'm going to be fascinated to see who shows up when the cameras ain't around. But we're going to have a conversation later, off camera, about how we actually put this on paper. Again, our special rapporteur, Raymond Brown, will be in charge of that project. You'll meet Raymond later as the moderator of the second panel. But let me talk about issues right quick. We started this day earlier on C-SPAN at 8 o'clock this morning. Dr. Joycelyn Elders, former Surgeon General, talking about the road to health. You could very easily have been on that panel, but I asked you to be on this panel because we have so many other experts already on that panel that Kaiser Permanente sponsored this morning. We had so many other folk on that panel. I asked you to be on this because I knew that once we completed that conversation about the road to health, I wanted to connect these things up. I wanted to connect the dots here. We said this morning, if you ain't got your health, you ain't got jack. You ain't got your health, you ain't got much of nothing. And we don't have a single black person to waste in this fight to do whatever it is we're going to do here on this covenant or on this contract. That said, talk to me. I know there's so many. And I'm going to ask you to talk about issues per se, but I want your thought on how important, how we should rate, where in this discussion we include the notion of whatever it is we're going to demand on the health disparities that black people have to deal with. We talked about the issue this morning. I want to advance now and talk about how that factors into a conversation as a part of a contract or a covenant. What ought we be saying or discussing in this next meeting? What ought we be demanding when it comes to that particular plank of this covenant? Does that make sense?
Well, let me just say that whatever we do, we can do it better if we're healthy. We are the richest country in the world, 25% of the wealth, only 5% of the population, and yet we allow, I would like to say our government, but it's not our government, we're the government. So, and as we've heard over and over, it's us. We've got to stand up and start making demands on the things that we need. Health is more than absence of disease. It's about education. You know, Brown is more than 50 years past now, and we still have bright young people graduating from high school with shoes that light up when they walk, and our brain which goes dead when they talk because they aren't being educated. We have...
Now, the elder, you sound like Jesse Jackson on that one.
Well, I probably stole it from him.
All right.
He stole it.
But trust me, Jesse will steal it from you, though. That's another conversation.
But, you know, I think that we've got to address the health care issue, and it starts with education. And all of the problems that we're having with health today we end up with a health illiterate society. 50% of the people that are in the hospital in Atlanta today are there because they didn't take the medicine right. And there are things that they really, in fact, have control over. And I've said the government's us, but we have a government who feels that we can't afford to teach health education. We can't afford to teach young people how to take care of themselves and prevent HIV/AIDS. You know, it's ravaging our community, and we sit back and we feel we can't tell them about things that they need to know to protect themselves. That, to me, is a real problem. I feel that we, as a society, should be ashamed of abusing our young people for not giving them the information they need to make good decisions.
Let me ask you if I can press you on that. I want to press you on that respectfully, and I say respectfully because I don't mean to put you on the spot, but everybody, I'm going to do this with everybody here as we move around here, because I'm trying to get to advance the conversation and start for this audience to give them a sense of what we are going to be talking about, or at least should be talking about when we try to design this document. So, you're a former Surgeon General. I hear everything you said. Nobody in this audience disagrees with it. We all say amen in the fine tradition of the black church to everything you said. That said, if there were one thing in this covenant, let's say we got 10 planks in this contract, 10 planks in this covenant, and there is but one thing that you think ought to rise to the top of the list for what we should demand from anybody who comes looking for our vote. What do we want them to do? What do we want to demand of them that they will in fact do in the best health interest of black America? If we were going to put something at the top of that list, what might that be? It's not conclusive. I'm just curious.
At the very top of that list, for as I'm concerned, would be education, education, education.
Okay.
We need comprehensive health education in our schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. We can't continue this problem of teaching abstinence only and abstinence until marriage when we are losing our bright young people to HIV/AIDS, to other STDs, and the number of STDs in our black community is 3,000 times higher than in the white community. We're 9 times more likely to die with HIV. So why can't we educate our people about how to be healthy, about good nutrition, about even taking their medicines right, about exercising, about what they need to do. So I'm saying that there are lots of simple things that we could do today.
Okay.
If we would educate our people and get started.
I hear the point. The point is health education.
Yes.
We need to demand, I got it, health education. I'm taking these notes, as I'm sure you are, so that we know where to go in the coming days and weeks as we continue this conversation when C-SPAN's cameras are not around. George Fraser, you are known across the country as the networking guru. Everybody who knows you knows your work. And FraserNet knows that you are the person that talks and convenes similar conversations to talk about how it is that on the economic front, certainly on the entrepreneur front, we have to do better by ourselves, but also demand, again, that there's a role for government to play. And I want to be very clear. This is not, a conversation just about what they ought to do. We understand that there's a role we have to have. Mr. Farrakhan mentioned that to us. We got to, and Reverend Sharpton mentioned that. We got to have contact with ourselves. We got that. But in terms of this covenant, in terms of this contract, talk to me about economics and what your sense is of what we ought to be discussing in the days and weeks ahead about what the demand will be on the economic front.
First, let me just address a very simple issue and get some clarity around leadership, because I believe we're talking about personal leadership around these issues. So let us define and be real clear what leadership is as it relates to economics and all the other issues we're going to be discussing on this panel. First, to be a leader is to be awake and alert and to be dissatisfied at all times. You see, we have come a long way, but we have much further to go. So I'm not happy. I hope that you're not happy.
That's right.
but I am motivated by a positive anger directed towards positive change. Leadership is action, not position. It is not some appointment that you get. I see your mouth running, but what are you doing? Okay? So we have to focus on the deeds, on the action that we are taking individually in respects to our own homes and our own communities. Leadership is influence. Who are we influencing? We are influencing our children. And if our children cannot see the future, they will not pay the price, right? We are all replaceable by our children. A leader is one who has found their voice and is engaged in helping others to find their voice. So this is all about what each of us are doing individually in our own personal lives. Now, as it relates to economics, it is real clear. It is very simple. Success runs in our race, make no mistake about that. We're a $723 billion annual economy. If we were a nation, we would be the 11th richest nation in the entire world, okay? But we know that we have taken the art of consumption to a whole new level. We know that less than 5% of our economy is recycled back in our community, all right? So we have to fix that, but we have a huge economic base to work from.
Exactly.
Secondly,
Go ahead, brother.
Secondly, black folk from just my generation alone, and I'm 60 years old, I know I look 35 or 40, but I'm actually 60. And for those of you that were not entirely sure, yes, I am black. Make no mistake about it. There's a sister going over there. Black folks from just my generation alone.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That was very important for us to know.
Black folks from just my generation alone have amassed over 500 billion hours of formal education and professional training from just one generation alone. If you wanted to convert that into dollars at just $10 an hour and try to get a decent education and professional training for $10 an hour, that means the collective intellectual capital base from one generation alone is worth in excess of $5 trillion. And by the way, 60% of the black workforce in this country, 9 million of us, are in executive, managerial, supervisory, professional specialty, vocational, technical, administrative, sales, and business ownership positions. Now that is an army of potential role models and mentors to help those who are stuck in the cycle of poverty. In fact, there is no army in the entire world larger than the army of black folk in this country. I've traveled all over the world, as many of you have traveled all over the world. I've been to South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, all over the Caribbean, and all over this country, speaking 120 times a year for the past 20 years. And I can tell you that there are no black people in the entire world doing better than we are. In fact, if the truth be known, we are the beacon of hope for every single person of African descent in the entire world. And because we are morally grounded and spiritually rooted people, we also know that to whom much is given, much is required. Okay? So we have everything we need to succeed. Now we need a new unifying purpose. We need a third and final moral imperative and moral assignment. I said third. The first two, in case you forgot, was freedom, a 250-year fight for freedom, where 10 generations of our ancestors fought and died for our freedom. They chartered a good and righteous course, stayed that course, and we were freed in 1864, and we don't have to spend 1 minute of our lives fighting for our freedom. That was the first moral imperative and moral assignment from my perspective. The second was civil rights, voting rights, and public access from 1864 to 1964, 4 generations, 100 years. So we were unified around those ideas. If you were black in America, during those two periods, you were down with the freedom thing, and you were down with the civil rights, voting rights, and public access thing. Okay, if you were black in America. And Harriet Tubman's network of freedom fighters on the Underground Railroad is a legacy that remains with us today. And Dr. King's network of garbage men, black folk, white folk, rich folk, is a network and a legacy that remains with us today. So the third and final moral imperative, the next unifying purpose, has to be this notion, has to be this idea of closing the income and wealth gap between black folk and white folk, economic development and wealth creation. Now, how do we know this? Because in the last 40 years since civil rights, we have observed something as black people as the Jews observed being freed from the Pharaoh and have to wander in the desert. We've learned that in a market-based economy, in a democratic capitalistic society, the only color that really matters is green. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's what it is. So until our pile of green is as big and as high and as deep and as wide as any other cultural group's pile of green, we will never be considered an equal at the table of democratic capitalism. A. B, we look at money differently. We look at wealth differently. We know that wealth is not happiness per se. How do we know that? Because we all know people who have money who are not happy. So we sort of internalize, because we're moral and spiritual people, wealth as the next level of freedom because it provides us choices. And you see, God too wants us to have unlimited choices. And then it is the management of our choices that is the essence of living. So we want unlimited choices. You see, unlimited choices. So the next movement must be, the next unifying purpose must be economic development, wealth creation, the closing of the income and wealth gap. And to do that, we must more wisely manage the $753 billion annual economy. And two, we must become an entrepreneurial culture. We must create work and jobs for our people. That's what every culture that has come to this great country has done, has created work and jobs for their people, because that is the only way to raise up the poor. That's what we must do, and we must do that by using networking, strategic alliances, joint ventures, partnerships as our infrastructure to build the kind of partnerships, the kind of love, the collaboration, collectiveness that is necessary. Finally, let me say this real plain, so just so you don't get this confused. God ain't giving us anything else. We have freedom, civil rights, voting rights, and public access, a $723 billion annual economy, $5 trillion of intellectual capital, 9 million of us are doing okay. We ain't getting nothing else. So until we learn how to come together, work with and through each other, because that's the final thing God wants us to learn, until we learn how to connect the dots, leverage our collective resources and intellectual capital, when we learn that, we will be a force to be reckoned with, and don't you believe for 1 minute that others do not understand that. All right.
You hitting, Now, George, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later as we move to this second round, but y'all write this down so you don't let me forget. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget. And I agree, as I'm sure everybody else does in here, with pretty much everything you said. At the very end, I'm not even saying I disagree with it, but I want to give you a chance to explain it a little more deeply to make sure that I understood what you meant. When you say we ain't going to get nothing else, somehow that's the way the rules work for us, but that ain't the way the rules work for other people. Other people have everything and they still get more on top of everything that they already have. Now, if you're telling me that we ain't getting nothing else and there's nothing that we ought to demand on the economic front for what we give to the body politic, then that's what you're saying. I want to come back to that. I don't think that's what you meant, but I want to come back to that, because there are other folk who engage the political process for the very purpose of getting back what they want.
All right, let me address that. We are the only culture in the history of humankind that put political empowerment before economic empowerment. Last year, we elected 10,000 black public officials in this country, and we're still at the bottom of the educational and economic heap. Now, what does that mean? I mean no disrespect. What does that mean? We cannot do it by politics alone. How dare we put that kind of pressure on our political leadership? But again, we are no fools. We were born at night, but not last night. We didn't come down here with the last drop of rain, right? And we do understand that we're all impacted by public policy, and we're all impacted by the politics of inclusion.
Do we agree then that it's not an either-or proposition, but a both-and proposition?
Absolutely.
All right, hold that thought. Hold that thought. Hold that. I'm coming back to it. Let me talk, Angela Glover Blackwell. I want to keep moving in this direction as my time is running here, about policy. And you are Policy Link. This is what you do. This is your expertise, which is why we asked you to be here. Talk to me about process. if in fact this conversation at this point, and it may not, tell me what you feel, if it makes any sense at all, since you do public policy work, does it make sense for us, is it doable for us to put something on paper? I mean, it's worked for other people. Can we put something on paper and extract from the body politic, not in place of, as George says, what we need to do, but in addition to, not either or, both and. Can we extract something from them if we put something on paper, whatever that might be? Talk to me about process, since that's so much of what you do on the public policy front.
We can make it work.
Is that her mic? I'm not hearing anything.
Can you hear me?
No.
Oh.
Try it again, try it again.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Can you hear it now?
You hear me?
Cornell, can she borrow you?
Cornell's coming.
Yeah. Just hold it up, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Terrific.
You can sit back, Dr. West. It's all right. Don't hate the player, just hate the game, but that's all right. Go ahead, Andy.
We can make it work, but in order to be able to have a contract in our community, to have a covenant, to be able to put all this forward, write it down, and have it come back to us in the way that we want, we have to return to first principles. Because people need to know that there's some things that unite us that can be translated into policy that we can hold people accountable for. We spend a lot of time being nostalgic about the day, back in the day, when community really surrounded all of us and we were together and we knew we had to look out for each other. We now seem to have forgotten that that was policy. It consisted of projects. It was about politics. It was everything that we had. The first principles of community will have to be the basis for what we put forward. We cannot assume that the things that we once cared for and held dear will continue to happen if we don't invest in them. I mean, after all, for those of us who value community, and for us community is always two-way, it's geographic and it's our being together. There's no question that community was the scaffolding that allowed us to be able to move up. It was the scaffolding. And we can recreate that scaffolding through policy. So we have to get back to the first principles of community if we're going to put forward a platform. In doing that, we have to understand the things that are essential. One is that in community, you don't let people come in and just take people out and not ask, where have they gone? How has this happened? But yet the criminal justice system is doing just that. So part of our first principle has to be that we remain a core and we look out for each other. Education obviously is key, and education has to be at the top of the agenda, but we have to really know that it's education for what purpose. We have to make sure that it's not just any education, it has to be high quality education that prepares us to be contributing. I absolutely agree with the notion that we have to do something about the wealth gap. The wealth gap is as broad in this country as it was in 1865 between Black America and the rest of America, and that too could be a policy agenda. If we need to build wealth, we need to have strategies in place that allow people to build wealth. And when we're thinking about the development of our communities, we need to not just let any kind of development come in, because the first principles of community say that we need equitable development. And equitable development means that everybody can participate and everybody can prosper. And so I believe that the process that we have to go through is one in which we have to take the time to talk to each other, remember what we have in common, and get back to the first principles of community.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I want to come back. You put a lot out there. A very cogent presentation, but you put a lot in there, and I want to pick up on many of the things you raised in terms of offering that litany of ideas about what we ought to be talking about with regard to this covenant or this contract. We'll come back to that. Two other persons I want to get in who've not spoken as yet, and then we're going to move and mix this thing up and go at it another way. Let me go to Pat Ford, Patricia A. Ford, who's the chair-elect of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. But what you may not know about Pat Ford is for many, many years, she was one of the top-ranking officials, indeed one of the top black officials, indeed the top sister, basically in the union movement in this country. She served us honorably, those working-class Americans honorably for years as a part of the union movement in this country. With that, Pat, you give me an interesting opportunity to ask really a couple different questions, if I can, and get you to kind of fuse them for me. Let me ask you a two-part question. First of all, if you had to, given all your wonderful years of experience on the union side, if there was but one thing that we would include in this covenant or in this contract, that we would demand in behalf of black folk, black working class folk, the folk that you know and represented so well for all these years. Talk to me about what that one thing, give me a couple suggestions. What might that be that we need to demand in exchange for our votes in behalf of the working class of black America, number one. And number two, tell me what your sense is as you work on black civic participation, black voter participation, what you hear more than anything else about why the black folk who you do come in contact with, who are not involved, who you are trying to get involved, why they are not involved. Two questions. Can you answer those for me?
On your first question about the one thing that you could do to help black trade unionists is that if you were to look, as you mentioned, I was one of the highest ranking, if not the highest ranking African-American woman in the labor movement, being executive vice president of the Service Employees International Union. And for those of you, they have 1.8 million members. Is that when you look at that, you can just see that as this debate that's being discussed presently by the labor movement does not include us. Because those that head up international unions do not look like us. Now, there have been those of us, and like my president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, Bill Lucy, who's on the next panel, will speak probably more about this, who have put papers in to talk about the contribution that we have and that we have made. Now, let me be real clear. We fought to get into this labor movement. That's what A. Philip Randolph was about. They were just as racist as any other movement in this country. And I love the trade union movement. I truly do. Because we have done more to lift people out of poverty than any other social program that exists in this country. It was the working at General Motors and Fords, which I'm sure Mayor Archer can tell you about, that created a black middle class when they went to work in those plants. And those are good union jobs. We need to continue to fight for that. We're the ones with the pension plans. We need to continue to fight for that. But more importantly, we need you when this debate takes place. Don't just say, oh, that's the union stuff. Black women are the most likely to be organized in this country. We take the lead. Black men are the second most likely to be organized in this country. We have every right. We're the most active of participation politically in the labor movement. We have every right to be at that table. And we need your help to demand that we be at that table as we go forward with this agenda with respect to working people, and that we are not left out of those discussions and not represented. On your second question...
Let me jump in right quick. I just want to give you an idea how my mind is working here, so you understand again how we're trying to continue to connect these dots. So if, for example, just talking out loud here, which is a dangerous thing to do live on national television to a bunch of black folk, but let me do this anyway. Maybe y'all can turn the camera that way for just a second. Don't look at me just ignore me for a second while I talk to my people here for a second. The way this might work, for example, the union movement in this country, the labor movement, has historically been most supportive of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
So have been black folk. As you know, we are the most loyal constituency within the Democratic Party. When we start to demand things of certain people, it's very easy to say to the powers that be who run the Democratic Party, since the labor movement doesn't respect us, you better go talk to your boys who run the labor movement and tell them from them they need to deliver on this. And if you can't get your boys who run the labor movement to deliver on this, then we can't deliver for you. Now, if the Democrats want to win, they will go see their boys, show enough, with the quickness and say, hey, unless you do A, B, and C, then we can't deliver the black vote, and you gonna be in trouble, and we gonna be in trouble. Are y'all feeling me on this? Somehow you connect these dots and start to leverage what you have. That's what we're talking about here. So, Pat, I appreciate that answer. Now to the second part of the question.
On the second part, the question that I would say that get asked the most, and what has happened is that we have let other people define this answer to us by saying that we are apathetic as a people. We are not apathetic as a people. When we see the need and the right to, or what we want to vote, if we see if it's our best interest, we go to the polls.
So when Jesse's running, we show
that's
up.
Right. And
when Jesse's running 84 and 88, we show up.
We should go to the polls and masses. We made a statement, and when Jesse ran, when Reverend
when Al Sharpton ran,
and when it raises up the number of elected officials that we have at the local and the state level, which is where most of our power is at. We're too small of a population to deal with this on the national level. We're only 13% of the population. We can't carry any party by ourselves. But what we can affect is in our local and our state communities where we have had a lot of success. But we can make our voice heard on the national party because as both parties realize they can't win without us. That's why one is trying to get us to vote for them and the other one is going to have to try to figure out how to keep our vote. The one question I will answer your question, that when you talk about apathy, it's not apathetic among our people. When you think in terms that we have guaranteed the people the right to vote in Iraq, that we have made, opened up more days to vote, that they protected the lines in there, that they had polling places in this country so that they could vote there, and yet still in Ohio, they couldn't even guarantee that we could get to the polls in Ohio, that we were in line for 8 to 10 hours. That is just totally unacceptable. That is not apathy. That is disenfranchisement, and that's what I hear from people. We need to protect that vote on the front end. I believe in the lawyers on the back end and file. We have plenty of lawyers out there, but if we'd have more polling places and have more people working those polls, we would have had more votes and the outcome may have been different for our folks.
All right. I'm glad you said that. Most, by applause, agree. But I also want to keep reiterating this notion that when you talk about a covenant or you talk about a contract, what ought to be stated very clearly is once you define what this document is, both parties have an equal chance and equal playing field to respond to the document. Are y'all feeling me on this? So Pat's point just now was a point that was about Democrat versus Republican, and to her words, respectfully, and she might be right, about how the outcome might have been different. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a document, a covenant, or a contract that once it's written, anybody, and as we say, everybody has got a chance to respond to the document. Now, we could take bets on who we think will respond more positively or more proactively. That's not our issue. That's their issue. Our issue is to create the document and then say, here it is. What you gonna do? That's what we have to do, and everybody gets a chance to respond to it. Everybody got that? Let's move on. Bishop Eddie Long, last but not least, thank you for being gracious enough to have us here. The question I want to ask you before we expand this thing out, it is clear from this last election, Mr. Farrakhan alluded to it earlier, that the black community is not a monolith. We do not think or act the same, and thank God. We all have our own individuality. The challenge, I think, is for us to express our individuality with integrity. We all have individuality, but can we express that with integrity? That's our challenge. That said, because we don't all think the same, in this last election, the White House, Mr. Rowe, Mr. Bush made a strong play to get the African American vote. They decided to do that through the African American church, as you well know. It's no secret you were one of the persons invited to the White House, other black ministers invited. We all saw the picture. If you thought it was a secret, it wasn't, because we saw it in the New York Times. We saw you, we saw T.D. Jakes. We saw a whole bunch of y'all, Eugene Rivers, Marvin Winans. We saw a whole lot of y'all sitting up in the White House, meeting with the president as he was making his play at the black churches. Now, my point is this. I'm not mad at anybody for meeting with the president. I'm glad y'all got in, CBC don't, but that's another issue. I'm not mad at anybody for accepting he is the president of the United States, respectfully. When the president calls and wants to meet with you, you go sit down with him. That's not my issue. My question for you is how we, this is not about your politics or mine or anybody else's, I'm talking about a larger question here, respectfully. How do we as a people navigate what is clearly becoming tricky territory where one party starts to play to our emotions and feelings based on a couple different issues that are wrapped in morality. Now, that's not me talking, that's the reality of what happened last time. There are a couple issues. There were a couple of issues, and I'm not, again, it's not about, I'm not trying to make a statement here, it sounds like, but I'm asking a question here. There are a couple of issues that were wrapped in morality. And because black folk have always been more conservative on the moral issues and more liberal on the social questions, it's caused a quagmire here. And it's made the territory much more tricky. So how, as an ecumenical leader, do you suggest that we as a people, I'm not talking about the issues now, but just as a people, how do we navigate? What's your best advice on how we can best navigate, best practices, if you will, this very tricky territory when these moral issues are starting to divide and conquer, if you will, the black vote? How do we navigate that process?
Well, let me start by this, because one of the things that we're doing is that right now.
Okay.
First of all, let me say, just because we went to the house did not mean we had intercourse. It means
I got you.
That's first thing. And somebody has to go to the house.
Right.
Okay. The challenge we have, and one of the wonderful things, this is my first time ever meeting Minister Farrakhan personally. Warm, wonderful, great individual. I thank God for that. Before, with Reverend Sharpton and even all of us, the media would tell us what we've been saying about one another and what we've been saying about issues, and the things that we haven't said but being misinterpreted. And our error is that we're reading ourselves from the media's eyes instead of coming together in this place or this kind of setting and talking and saying what we actually mean, and being able to agree to disagree and not condemn a brother or a sister if that we are going to the White House or the outhouse or whatever house, understanding that we have a fiduciary and a civic and a moral responsibility wherever we go to represent. So if we give credence to the integrity of the men and women who are here, we're in the first panel, be in the third panel, to understand that we do operate in a degree of integrity to go into places and not limit our access into places, because we are representing a people and we must gain information to make the right decisions to galvanize our people. That's number two. I'm Baptist, so I don't know where I'll close. Number three.
This is your house.
I understand. So get over behind the podium. Number three, we cannot be afraid to understand that we are now reevaluating our destiny and reevaluating the direction. And so in all of that, we must talk to discuss where we are, where we're going, who we have access to, who we have touched, who we have moved in, and all of that. So what looks to be confusing, if you understand God, he's always operated in what looked to be confusing, but when he got finished, the amazing thing of God and the glory of God was revealed in what he wanted to have come to pass. In this thing that we're dealing with right now, and understanding that, we represent and have to represent, understand this conversation did not just start. You have just made a wonderful point of understanding that we have to get a mindset that we are doing generational works. This has started long before we came together to have this conversation. That is the reason why God identifies himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He wants you to understand, and wants me to understand, that we're building on the shoulders of generation after generation, and the vision that God has ordained is not housed in just one man or woman, but it's something that has been going, that we should get better and better and greater as the generations come to pass, and as we move in that and come together and walk in that. One of the challenges I have, and as Minister Farrakhan was talking, that I have with us, this sanctuary almost fills twice on a Sunday, and I can say powerful things, and folk will jump and tear up chairs, and we got to replace it. But when it's time to hit the streets, nobody wants to move. If we're going to grab something, Tavis, if we're going to grab something, as if my people, that said a whole lot about what we need to do. It says a whole lot about number 5, or whatever it is, that somehow today, regardless of the places we've been, because we're sitting here, says that we want to advance our people, we want to set an agenda, and we want to follow it. Now, doing that, there has to be a decision made, and this is a tough decision. The tough decision is, will we, Tavis, come together, even meet when the cameras are not on us, and make a decision for the betterment of the generations to come, that what will benefit them, we may not get a benefit out of it in our lifetime, but we're willing to pay the price that those who come after us will be able to get what God has ordained. That is a major decision that has to be made today. And the only way that'll happen, as I conclude, as we keep access to all, is the only way that's going to happen is that we not only get leadership, but we have to find, because every move in the black community came from a people who were sick and tired of being where they are. And if you're not sick and tired of being broke, you ain't never gonna get no money. If you're not sick and tired of being in the back, you'll never get in the front. And until we decide that we are sick and tired and enough is enough, tain't nothing gonna happen. And if we sit up and criticize whose house we went in just for dinner.
They fed y'all?
Just for dinner. And to have conversation. That if we do need to pick up the phone and call them, we do have access.
All right. I paused. I paused not because I didn't know where I wanted to go next. I paused because since you said he was a Baptist preacher, I thought number 7 was the offering. I was waiting for the deacons to walk out. All right. I want to do something a little unorthodox here because I know there's so much ground to cover, and I technically have a half an hour left, but I'm going to steal another half an hour from C-SPAN, so whoever's waiting backstage, give me another half an hour and we will work this out. But I know you want to hear a little bit more of this. We'll bring out the next panels. That gives me almost another hour here. So let me, just shy of an hour. So let me do something a little unorthodox. I know there's so much has been said, and I think everybody in here, everybody on this panel understands where I'm trying to go with this conversation. I know everybody's got something they want to respond to, add on, augment, disagree with. So I'm not going to throw questions out in this second round. Before we get to the third round, I want to give you a chance to respond to whatever it is you've heard so far you want to agree or disagree with. We'll start Reverend Al Sharpton and come back this way. There's no question, but I know you got stuff you want to say. I can see it on your faces already. So let me start with the Reverend Dr. Alfred C. Sharp.
Let me say this. 3 things.
About the covenant, about the contract.
I want to say the 3 things, and I'm glad I'm...
So now you're a Baptist preacher too?
I'm a Baptist Costal preacher, so I may go more than 3
That means you got more points than 3.
That's right, okay. That's right. 1, we must distinguish, as we have this conversation, the difference between black leaders and leading blacks. There's a big difference. The problem we have is that we're allowing others to project leading blacks like they're black leaders. I don't have a problem with black leaders, funded, financed, and supported by black people, going in any house for me, Eddie Long included. My problem is when we have people raised up who are totally alien to any accountability to our community, that are imposed upon us, and then supposedly that becomes the new view. So we must teach generationally that, yeah, we can be proud of a Colin Powell getting the way he got, but there wouldn't have been a Colin Powell if it wasn't an Adam Clayton Powell. And there wouldn't have been Condoleezza Rice if it wasn't for those 4 girls in Birmingham. Bush picked fruit off of trees that we plant planted and grew. He didn't plant those trees. So we need to get that straight. What we did in our campaign after the presidential race, we went back into the DNC. And we said we need a seat at the table. Right now, we have less blacks on the executive board of the Democratic National Committee than we've had in 40 years. Sister Green, I was talking about it. We chose one of our own, executive director of our group, Marjorie Harris. She's here somewhere. Ran up for DNC chair, asked people to support Marjorie Harris. Why? Because we wanted somebody at the table when they say we do not have the funds to know what the budget is. They told us the last week of the elections they didn't have funds for travel. We found out a week after the campaign they had millions of dollars still left in the bank. I'm talking about Democrat now. So we need to hold the accountability to those we do give our votes to.
Okay, stop. Before you go further, I'm going to let you finish all your points, but I want to stop you right quick. Why then, just tell me, right now, just tell me then why, if the Democrats came to us tomorrow, given what you just said, and ask us to vote for them tomorrow, if there are fewer black folk, if there are fewer black folk on the Democratic Leadership Executive Committee now than there were 40 years ago.
Right.
And when they needed our votes, and they wanted black folk like you and others to go out and help get those votes, and they had money sitting there and didn't cut you a check to travel to help get out the vote, why should I vote for another Democrat ever?
That's the question. That is the question. And I think that the answer has to come from a collective discussion, which is why we can't jump in on each other on who we talking to if all of us is coming home with less than what we should have. That's the real issue. And that's why we ran Harris. That's why we're addressing this now. I mean, D, I didn't get the votes I wanted. If we did, we'd be having this conversation in the East Room. But I got twice more votes in South Carolina than Dean. I got more votes in Georgia than Dean, and Florida than Dean, and Mississippi. He's the chair of the party. So we at least need to know why we're not more on the executive board. That's one. Two, the generational question, as we raised with Harris. We've got to bring the young generation on and not condemn them. We talk about what the hip-hoppers did and Truth Haim and others did with registered voters because we didn't like their style. Well, my mama didn't like the style when I was a kid. So some of the young people today may dress a certain way, but I never get when my mother saw Isaac Hayes she said he had on chains and her pantyhose. She didn't understand that then. We can't condemn these young people because many of us sitting right here in this church did a lot of things when we were young. Matter of fact, did all we could. Then come and join the church, jumped up the next Sunday and start singing things I used to do, I don't do no more. Most of you things you used to do, you can't do no more. We cannot allow them to take the policy discussion away from health care, our having an inordinate amount of the maladies and illnesses in this country, from education, where we're not being educated, and shifted into an argument that they are not prepared to debate with us. I have no problem debating morality with them. Their problem is they don't want that debate. I'm considered a liberal left-wing Democrat, but I can tell them about faith and morality because no matter how liberal and left I am, I still believe in salvation. I still believe in Jesus. I still believe in God. I don't need no right-winger or no right Christian to teach me about faith. Tavis, I was raised by a single mother that taught us how to pray, that taught us that we had to believe that God was for us. It'd be more than the whole world against us. I went Christmas Day to Dothan, Alabama to see my mom in the hospital. She has Alzheimer's disease. Didn't even know who I was. Didn't recognize me. It bothered me, so I went back to the hotel. I went back the next day, Brother Minister, thinking maybe it'd be better. As I walked in her room, she was sitting there humming the song Amazing Grace. And even though she didn't know her own son, she never forgot that song. So next time, next time any group of our ministers go see the president, tell him he don't have to teach me about faith. I know about faith, because some people think it was politics, but it was grace, Bishop. It wasn't civil rights, it was grace that brought me safe this far. And tell Bush that grace will lead us all.
All right, and the church said? Dr. West. I want to keep advancing this notion of this covenant and what might work here.
No, I think even as we talk about faith and grace, we have to keep in mind the art of criticism. That how we learn to lovingly criticize one another. That each one of us up here, every black leader has the potential to be pimped and prostituted by the white mainstream. Across the board. The question is, how do we lovingly stand beside each other when it looks as if we're not being accountable? This is the question. When I look at this great house, this man is a managerial genius, but I know that the people's wealth also built it. He didn't build it by himself. He knows that. Or when I look at Jakes, I see a spiritual genius, but I also know his people built his house. And so I can still come along as a late Christian and say to my brother out of love, I'm suspicious of your political courage when it comes to not just eating at the house, the White House, but dealing with policies that's crushing working people and poor people. And I can say that with love to the brother. Why? Because we may disagree on that, but he needs to know where I'm coming from. And for me, in the name of Jesus. I'm telling you, in the name of Jesus.
So Dr. West, in other words, you stepping in the name of love.
I'm stepping out. I'm not just stepping in the name of love, but I'm looking for a cross. I'm not just looking for wealth. I'm not just looking for flag. I'm looking for blood. I'm looking for struggle. I'm looking for who loves the people enough to sacrifice for them. And this brother has to have some love, because you ain't gonna put up with 25,000 Negroes and I have some love. I know that. I know that. That's a fact. But I want to see more political courage out of him and Jakes and the other folk who have all of these beautiful black people. Tell them the truth about their suffering, not just the spiritual reflection about their souls. We want their souls. We want their bodies. But we also got structures and institutions we got to address. And that's a rich legacy. And if we learn how to lovingly criticize each other, push each other back and forth, that's what I love about Minister Louis Farrakhan. We sat down and had the 9-hour lunch. I was supposed to have breakfast with the brother for 2 hours. We went 9 hours. You remember that, brother? Sharpton the same way, and in Harlem. Why? Because we decided that there's something bigger than us. And that's the suffering of the people. And we're going to keep the focus on that.
Brother Minister.
Yes, sir.
Let me, Brother Minister. Brother Minister, I'm just assuming, just guessing, you probably got something you won't say.
Having listened carefully to all of my wonderful brothers and sisters, I recognize that the thing that is missing is not the genius that is present or the genius that is absent, but the thing that is missing is the unity of us as a people. My beloved brother, Mr. Frazier, articulated some magnificent economic truths that can be realized fully by the unity of us as a people. My sister talked about education and health issues. We cannot any longer depend on a benevolent white person in office to look out for our needs. That responsibility is ours. Now, whether my brother, Bishop Eddie Long, can visit the White House and speak on behalf of us, or whether the Reverend Jackson can visit the White House and speak on behalf of us, or any of us,
They haven't invited me, Mr. Party. They haven't invited me to the White House.
Well, you're on your way though, brother, for sure. When you can assemble us like this, you are a very important man. The few points that I want to make is based on what I heard. My sister with the union, she wants to be at the right table at the right time to talk about the right issues where workers are concerned. Everyone at this table, my dear sister, talked about policy and community. Reverend Lowry and Reverend Sharpton brilliantly defined for us really the crux of the matter. Here's what I see. Respectfully, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. But power won't even concede to a demand if the demand is coming from a weak constituency that looks like they've lost their testicular fortitude. Careful now. Careful. I'm a Baptist preacher too. But listen, family, listen. The generational gap is serious. But it's written of in Scripture. When Moses gathered the people in the wilderness, he spied the promised land. But there were some giants in the promised land. And the people were asked, go in, we're with you. They said, wait a minute, God. We would go, but the giants are there. They had no faith that they could take the land from the giants. So what did God say? Okay, you wander in the wilderness till you die out. And I will take your children and they will inhabit the promised land. Martin Luther King said, I've been to the mountaintop. I have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get there when we separate from a pharaohic idea of mental slavery. Our children, listen, our children cannot eat at the table of illusion and hypocrisy. Most of us who have access, who have wealth, who have quote unquote positions, we are like mannequins in the shopping mall of democracy. When you go to the shopping mall, you see the mannequin. mannequin is dressed in what you would like to buy. The mannequin can't talk. The mannequin can't walk. We got black people in power, but they don't have powers. We got black people with money. We have black people with money that we think are giants, but in the company of their white counterparts, they are midgets. Now, if we want to get where we want to go, we can't focus on the house that has rejected us and our fathers for 400 years. We have to now focus on ourselves. Now follow this, and I'm out of here. I'm complete. Follow this. President Bush, bless his heart, is worried about weapons of mass destruction. No dark nation should have a weapon of mass destruction. They have a fear. France got it. England got it. I think Germany may have something. South Africa has it. Israel has it. These are some of them the former colonial masters. They have the right to have it, but don't give it to a darker power. We're worried about China has it. India has it. Lord have mercy. Pakistan got it. Korea was the axis of evil. Now Korea said, well, we got it. All of a sudden they fell off the screen. It's now Iran and Iraq. Well, if they are so afraid of weapons of mass destruction, my teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, said, our unity is more powerful than an atomic or hydrogen bomb. That's the one thing we have never tried. We've kneeled in, crawled in, prayed in, lied in, slept in, but still we are out. If you want to get what you want, we gotta start with a contract with us. A contract, a covenant with us. We in leadership make a covenant with your people that you will never sell them out. We as leaders, listen. We as leaders, so-called, must make a covenant with our people that nothing is more important than the salvation of a people who are now on a death march. While we're singing and dancing and popping our finger and shaking our backside to the world, we are on a death march into ovens, but not the same oven called Auschwitz. But it is a destruction coming to our people through bad health care, no health insurance, HIV, AIDS, drive-by shootings, gang conflict, crack cocaine. We are now become the enemy of ourselves. So we have to make a covenant. And in closing, in my conclusion, oh yes, I'm a Baptist preacher now. In my conclusion, in the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, there was some dry bones that were in a valley. And the bones were talking to one another. They were having a conversation about a contract. And as they were having this contract, some of the bones said, our hope is lost. Our bones are dried. We are cut off from our part. There's some that are watching by television and some in this audience that think that we will never come together, that we will never make the right covenant or contract. I say to you, go back and read your scripture. Because when the Son of Man was set down in that valley that was full of bones, he spoke to those bones, and the bones shook and the bones rattled. But they never stood up. So he went back to his sender and he said, Lord, I have spoken to the bones. And nobody has spoken to the bones like black leaders and black preachers. Nobody speaks to the bones like a Reverend Jackson or a T.D. Jakes or Bishop Long or Bishop Patterson or Cornel West. And those of us that preach, Reverend Sharpton, the bones always listen. The bones shake. The bones rattle, but they never get up and they never do what they're supposed to do. So one generation dies and another generation is born, and we continue to run the same game. So the Son of Man went back to his sin and said, I've been talking. The bones been shaken, but there's still no life in them. He said, well, don't talk to the bones no more. Prophesy to the winds. And let the winds blow on these bones. See, Bush is a wind. Your rejection at the table is a wind. My brother's going to dinner in the White House and can't come away with what is in the best interest of all our people. Jesse running twice, but still couldn't come away with what our people need. All of this is a farce. If we don't make up our minds today to make this contract, this covenant today, not with us and the Democratic Party, to hell with the Democrats and to hell with the Republicans. If they want our vote, let's come as a unified body. Let's gather, Tavis, the scholars. We got them in theology to plan the moral and spiritual development of a people. Bishop Long is not the pastor of this church alone. T.D. Jakes is not the pastor of his church alone. Reverend Jackson and Reverend Sharpton and Reverend Lowry are not the pastors of their constituencies alone. These are the shepherds of an entire people. So what we shepherds, listen, what we shepherds have got to do is come in a room to hell with the camera. Turn the camera off, put the Bible on the table. That book will transform human life if you teach it right. Stop entertaining your people with religion and start teaching your people, and they will respond and they will be a better people. Listen. Let's gather our educators and sit in a room and plan the educational development of our people beyond the contrived education of the Western educational system. Dewey and Kant, who are the philosophers of Western education, were racist at the core. They deny you equal education because if you ever get equal education, they can't rule you anymore. They are not going to give it to you. You got to be willing to give it to yourself. Cornel West and Naim Akbar and all our great educators We didn't get what is making us through what we read in no school book. We got it from extracurricular activities, from teachers that gave us a bibliography that they don't recognize. We got to do the same for our people. We got to gather our health professionals. Sister talked about education. Well, tell me this. You going to depend on the undependable to educate us about health issues when keeping us and the American people sick benefits the pharmaceutical industry? Come on now. You are sick and you're dying. Even though you're learning better how to eat, your mouth is in the kitchen of your former slave masters. How then can you be free going to the supermarket and you didn't produce nothing that's on the shelf? If we don't farm, which is the engine of any national life, farming, you ran away from the South, running from farms. Now the enemy got the farms and we got nothing, so we're dependent on somebody else to feed us, clothe us, and shelter us. That's why we're in a terrible health condition. Our ignorance is killing us. Our pastors need to be taught. Go back into the scriptures and teach our people how to eat, to live. Our radio stations, our television stations can't pander to the base human instinct where we become listeners to a degenerate culture pervade on radio and television and records. Jesus said, as a man thinketh, so is he. Well, as a man feeds your mind, you can't be no more than what you eat mentally. So if we allow BET not to be the purveyor of health to our people, rather than just music and dance and funk, you have to understand we're being destroyed, not because we're black, we're being destroyed because we're ignorant. My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. All of us can go where we want to go. But Tavis, I'm with you to make a covenant, not with them, but a covenant with us. And if we gather the scholars and put them in a room, let's come up with a 10-year spiritual plan, a 10-year moral development plan, a 10-year educational plan, a 10-year economic plan to gather that $750 billion and put it to use to evolve and develop us. It's all in our hands. That's what he meant when he said God ain't gonna give you no more, because God has given you everything you need, but you're not using what you got. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry.
I sort of feel, I sort of feel like the, I sort of feel like the Disney character, and I really want to just say, that's all, folks. Let me do this. Let me do this, because as empowered as I know you are already, Mike Dyson, Jesse Jackson, and the rest of them ain't even taken the stage yet. So you know there's more to come. Let me do this to make best use of the few minutes that we have left. I would not dare have interrupted that presentation from the brother minister. That said, we are really over time for this first panel. Let me start with Mayor Archer on this end here and ask, again, not to, I hope, restricting a question. I want to let you close in your own way, but talk to me, Mayor Archer, right quick, if we can do it literally in just a couple of minutes each. We can just stay within a couple minutes time frame. Let me ask you your thought again, as we have had this conversation for the better part of 2.5, almost 3 hours now, this conversation about this notion of this covenant, this contract. What say you now, almost 3 hours later, about the idea of it? We've heard what Minister Farrakhan thinks of it. He suggested he's down with the idea of it, but it ought to be with us, never mind the parties. And if they can't then respect and respond the document we have with what we want for ourselves, then they don't deserve our votes. I think we're saying the same thing. There's some nuances in here. We'll work through that part of it. But again, don't want to color the question. Not even sure there is a question, but I want to give you right quick 2 minutes for your final thought about this idea of how we leverage vis-a-vis a covenant or a contract what we know we have in terms of our compelling strength and power as black people.
Tavis, I have a sense that on the basis of knowing these outstanding men and women with whom I'm privileged to occupy the stage and those who will come behind us, as well as the healthcare professionals that you had earlier, from the genuine feeling of respect and embracement of the ideas that people have literally stood on their feet to show America their support for what's being said, I think it's very clear that we have come to the end of the exciting conversation, and what really needs to be done is to come together in a room where we go about the business of doing what these men and women and those at home, I'm sure by their amens and by their tell it and that's right and the feeling that they've expressed that we cannot hear here, that they want us to work. I'm willing. The National Bar Association, of which I'm a past president of, there are those that follow me. The person who is now the president of the American Bar Association, Robert Gray, is an African-American lawyer. Those of us who have the talents are willing to come to the table and to lend ourselves. There are many like me who belong or who have been elected to corporate boards. One board, for example, that I sit on, Johnson Controls. It's a Tier 1 automobile supply company. There are, what do you talk about, the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 1000? We're the 12th company to belong to the $1 Billion Roundtable. The $1 Billion Roundtable are those companies that do $1 billion a year with ethnic minority vendors and women vendors. And on women, women have created more jobs than males. Women are absolutely brilliant. They need to be at our side as equals because it becomes very important to have them at that table. Thus, I would say after you hear from the second panel, which I'm sure will be just astounding, then through your leadership and your point person, there needs to be a sit down and let us go to work and then come back next year. Because you see, it's not just 2008. We're going to have midterm elections where people are going to be running for governor, for United States senator, for United States congressperson. Why not get to work now and roll out and begin to roll out, because it will be something that will be a work in progress, not something that is just done and over, but it will be a work in progress that everybody needs to come to the table, and we need your help and your help at home to give us your ideas and your thoughts, because I don't have all the answers. They might, I don't, but I'd like to know what you think. That way, when we come out with something, it's something that you can embrace and it makes sense.
Let me ask you, I want to do this as seamless as possible. It is a bit unorthodox, but I'm going to ask this side from George Fraser this way and Jammu Green the other way. After you offer your 2-minute closing remarks, I'm getting real tight on time, so work with me here. I appreciate it. I'm going to ask you, Mayor Archer, if you will exit the stage this way so they can put your mic on the person on the next panel that will sit in that seat. Take that, pop that. Yeah, you got to disconnect this thing. Yeah, did they give you the gig? Thank you. And we can start to, thank you. Thank Mayor Archer for being here today. We can start the process of getting prepared to move the next panel on. We won't have to take any break here live on C-SPAN. Bishop Eddie Long, you've been awfully kind to have us here.
Yes, sir.
I want to give you 2 minutes, sir, to just offer a brief closing remark, whatever your thoughts might be about this notion of this covenant, this contract we have been discussing here today.
Very simply, Tavis, and to all, I would just like to offer this one thing, and I think with the contract and or covenant, there has to just be an understanding among us, which is already starting to evolve at this moment. As the Bible says, where there's no vision, the people perish. And so what we're gathering now, what we're doing now is projecting the vision that a people now can follow and buy in on and move in. So the real work is not what I have to say as a closing remark, so I'm not going to prolong the time. The real work is if we commit ourselves to one another, to coming together and projecting and giving a God-given unified vision to the people that motivates us to carry us through everything that we have to go through to achieve the goal in which we have stated. And that is the way God ordained for us, and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves.
He said, one second, Bishop, before you give him the love I know you want to give, I want you to understand that in all the planning for this and of all the facilities in this city, there was not a single solitary request that we made of Bishop Eddie Long with regard to accommodating our needs to be here today. Not a single request that he or his wonderful team of people did not accommodate. Please thank Bishop Long for having us here today. I appreciate you. I love you, man. You're a courageous brother, man. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. All right, Angela Glover Blackwell, I've been delighted to have you. You are one of those persons that I hope will continue to be a part of this conversation as we move forward, because it really is about how we procedurally, what the process is for doing this business of the covenant or the contract, whatever it might be called. 2 minutes, Angela, for your final thoughts.
It's how the process is.
Hold on, that mic is still not. Yeah. I think Dr. West must have arranged that. Yeah.
It's how the process is. It's also what the content is.
Yeah. A little closer, yeah.
It's how the content is as well as how the process is.
Hey, is there a hand held around her? I'm sorry, we starting to sink into the abyss here at the end now.
It's not just...
There you go.
It's not just the process, it's also the content. We can agree at this level of what we clearly all believe in, and still, when the opportunities present, end up doing the wrong thing. We have to be able to get beneath our agreement and understand the issues that confront us every day and get our position together on those issues. Too often, and I think the contract or the covenant could be another opportunity for it, we come together around the common ground, which turns out to be the lowest common denominator. That thing that we can all agree on without stretching. If we don't stretch, we won't get to the place that we're trying to go. What we need to do is find the uncommon common ground, those highest points of agreement that cause us to stretch, cause us to challenge ourselves, and to be able to find the authenticity in what we know that can translate into the policies and strategies that will make up the substance of where it is we want to go. Thank you.
Please thank Angela Glover Blackwell. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. Thank Angela once more. Yes, thank you. There are really just a handful of people, 3, 4, 5, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people, I think, again, in 6 years of hosting these conversations annually in February. And now we have decided to take the next step to actually turn this into something concrete for all of us to embrace. There have been only a handful of people that I have asked to be a part of every single one of these symposiums. I will not do these symposiums unless Dr. West is here. Dr. West, your final thought.
Thank you very much. No, just very brief. I think it's very important for us to recognize what happened here today, that we have seen serious talk about a paradigm shift from preoccupation with success in narrow materialistic and hedonistic terms to greatness in the biblical sense. He or she is greatest among you will be your servant. And what I heard Minister Louis Farrakhan putting forward in formulation was, how do we come together to serve? We begin with the black social misery, but we have a global consciousness. We're not parochial and provincial. Once we're on the move, then those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth is also on the move. That cuts across color, class, nation, sexual orientation, all human beings made in the image of God. But we have to get on the move. Let's use our success for greatness, for magnanimity, for greatness of vision, character, courage, and sacrifice. What a great moment this has been, though, brother. Thanks so much.
Dr. Cornel West.
I love you, man.
George Fraser, I thank you for coming from Cleveland and agreeing to be a part of this panel. And you put an awfully long list of provocative thoughts out there for us to think about on the economic front. Thank you for that history lesson and for the suggestions. In 2 minutes, right quick, please, your closing thought.
I anticipate. Can you hear me?
No. I think they're disconnecting some stuff to get ready for the next one. Let me see if is this working? Is this working? Is this working? There we go. Just pass that along. You can take those mics off and we'll just use this the rest of the way. Yeah. Come on. I've got a blue mic. Hello, hello. Test, test. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? All right.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you.
In anticipation of a profound insight from Minister Farrakhan, I prepared a chart. And this is a chart that I think says in another way what he so profoundly provided us today. This chart to me represents beautiful, educated, moneyed black people all over America. It could represent black organizations, it could represent black churches, it could represent black social and civic organizations. And what you will notice about these beautiful black people all over America is that everybody is doing their own thing. Caught up in a Eurocentric value of rugged individualism, having forgotten that it takes a village to raise a child. There is no power here, brothers and sisters. There is no power here. Power is most effective concentrated. You can take a 55-gallon drum of water, spill it over, it will disperse, find its own level, and eventually evaporate. You can take that same 55-gallon drum of water, put it under pressure, put a lid on it, put a hose in it, put a nozzle on the end of that hose, and it can cut concrete. There is no power with us being disconnected. See, there's nothing wrong with dispersion. I live in Cleveland, you live in Atlanta. We have folk in the Caribbean, we have folk in Africa. That's dispersion. That's okay, but we do not have to be disconnected. We are a disconnected people. We are powerless in disconnection. This is where all the power is. You see? This is where all the power is. Whether you are at the center of your own network or part of someone else's network, this is where the power is. There's a beautiful African proverb that says, when spiders unite, they can tie up a lion. When we connect, because we are disconnected, we're disconnected from those of like mind. We're disconnected from the best practices in our community. I don't care what it is that you want to do, what profession you want to engage in, what business you want to get into. I can introduce you to brothers and sisters all over America they are doing it to death. You just don't know who they are. You are disconnected from them. There is no power in disconnection. Okay? When we connect, we prevent interlopers from coming into our communities and taking and destroying at will.
All right, George.
Try to open up the Booker T. Washington delicatessen in Chinatown and see what happens. So we must connect. We must connect the dots. That must be the movement for our people in the 21st century. We need a lot of us doing a little instead of a few of us doing a lot. We need to get together to get ahead. That is why we must network. That is what we teach at the Power Networking Conference in June in Cleveland. Come and visit with us.
Thank you, George.
Thank you very much.
Please
remember what it said in Isaiah. Remember what it says in Isaiah. And the voice of the Lord said, "Whom shall go for us?" Then said I, "Here am I, send me." We must go, brothers and sisters. We must do this. We must take on the responsibility. We are responsible for our own success or failure. Thank you.
Thank George Fraser for being here, please. George?
I do believe that the younger generation is under attack in a number of ways, and I think one of the biggest ways they're under attack is by not being given the truth. In November of 2003, Rock the Vote held a debate with all of the Democratic presidential candidates, and we did a lot of polling, and we looked into where young people were, who they were supporting, and they were supporting Reverend Al Sharpton. Not just the black young folks, not the Latino young folks, not the white young folks. The majority were supporting the Reverend Al Sharpton because he was the only candidate speaking the truth to this generation. And that has to be a part of this contract. When he answered the question about gay and lesbian marriages and said, "I may not be in support of it, but it's not my business." And every other Democratic candidate said, well, I don't know exactly, the policy, I'm not sure about it. That's why young people were attracted to this message, and we have got to present the truth to this generation because we are under attack when it comes to Social Security and the crisis and the false information that is being given to young people about why this program should be basically dismantled. We need this contract to speak the truth about how important this program is, how young African Americans are benefiting in disproportionate ways, and how this is a safety net that we want to protect. We want the truth from the politicians and elected officials and policy leaders when it comes to opening the door for us. If you're not going to give us the resources that you have compiled, don't be the person who pulls those resources away. If you're not going to open the door, do not be the ones who slam the door in the face. So if we can hopefully bring together a common goal and vision of the generations working together, but what we have to stop is generational warfare and having the older leadership being the ones who are slamming the door in the faces of young people. But it starts with the truth. It starts with embracing our diversity, embracing the fact that a 15-year-old is different than a 55-year-old, and we need that rebelliousness. We need that energy. We need the passion that this next generation is going to bring, because it was brought before, but we're not going to be able to continue this without this next generation. Thank you very much, Tavis.
Please thank Jammu Green for being here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. I am going to have to, it's a great test, I'm going to have to put this notion of black unity to the test right now. I got about 6 minutes to make room for this second panel so they can get the time they need on C-SPAN. Let me see how fast we can do this. Pat, will you go right quick for me?
Thank you, Tavis. There's been many verses of the Bible has been spoken today, and I am no minister, but I want to speak up for black women. There are black women, there's women in the Bible, I have no doubt that they were black. I remember I spoke once about Esther. And what a courageous woman Esther was. And so I want to say to you that behind every great movement, there have been black women behind any social movement to make that happen, and they have to be a part of this covenant and this agenda. Demonstrated by Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, and Fannie Lou Hamer, and Evelyn Lowry, the wife of Dr. Joseph Lowry. We need to make sure that the issue for women who around Social Security is so critical to black women because that is usually their only source of income. We have to make that as a part of our covenant. We have to be sure to make that, to go global as this country is going global, and when they go to Africa and the Caribbean, that our policies here, we have a responsibility that our trade policies do not hurt our brothers and sisters in Africa and in the Caribbean and in Central and South America, because a lot of them look just like us. When we deal with this covenant, we got to make sure that women, you know, who are incarcerated has gone up by 800%, that what impact that has on the family and our children who are in foster care, that has to be a part of our covenant. When we talk about AIDS, we got to talk about the rise in AIDS among women and make that a part of this discussion. And when we talk about economic justice, let's remember that women still only make 72 cents for every dollar that men make. We have to talk about this for women because in our community, I do believe the majority of our community is raised, our children are raised by single women head of households, and they're very good at what they do because they usually do it off half the income of what men make. So let's not forget these courageous women, and thank you so very much, Tavis, for having this forum, and I'm a part of anything that you want to do, and I just can't tell you how we have been blessed by your talents and your presence and your commitment to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please thank Pat Ford for being here.
Brothers and sisters, on the 14th, 15th, and 16th of October, it's the 10th anniversary of the Million Man March, and we are mobilizing men and women and children across this country to unite, put demands before the government, but put demands on ourselves that we have the responsibility to change our condition. I yield the balance of my time to.
Please thank the brother minister.
A Muslim Baptist preacher didn't have any time to leave. Two or three quickly. I wanted to talk about liberation lifestyle. I'll delay that. I have to tell you the people's agenda in Atlanta is way ahead of you. We've already got a covenant, black people's agenda. We send to the candidates. We evaluate their response, and they get our support based on their response. Now the weakness is, and where we need to come together, is you always got some soloists who don't wait on the choir. And what I see us doing here is strengthening the choir. I think it's time for the choir to sing. We make our soloists stronger when we have the choir to back them up. Now the final thing I got to say is that we got to be so singing on this thing. I don't have any problem with Eddie Long, anybody who's going to the White House, as long as they're singing in the same key as the choir. And it may be our same notes, but the same key, at least the same key. And that brings me to the fact that black folks must not let them distract us on irrelevant issues and divide us in an election, because it's not just a matter of faith-based ministries. What Jesus called us to was love-based ministries. The Bible says there's faith, what else? Hope, and what else? And the greatest of these. And so love will not let you exclude anybody. Don't get caught up beating anybody down. I'm not going to join in any movement to beat down any segment of our people, black, white, young, old, gray, gay, straight, north, south. I'm going to love everybody because he loved me before I knew him. And I thank God that he loved me. Love, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. I give Jocelyn and Shelton the balance of my time.
I think when we look at the clock, there's probably no balance. And so I feel that there's one thing that needs to be said, and I'm going to say it, and I'm going to shut up. We're talking about health. And I want you to know that one of the things that this rich country needs is a part of that covenant, or as a part of that contract, or whatever you want to call it, is we need to have universal access to health care for all of our people. And if we don't care enough to put that on the contract, well then, far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't get upset when other people don't. We know that we're far behind in all, you've heard all the things we're behind in. We look at our children. Many of them are hungry. They're members of the 5-H club. We haven't talked about children very much. And the children are going to be who's going to replace us. They're hungry. They're healthless. They're hugless. They're hopeless and homeless. And I think it's our responsibility to take care of those problems if we plan to improve the health of Black America and make a difference in the 21st century.
The former Surgeon General, Dr. Joyford Elders.
Let me join everyone in thanking you, Tavis, for bringing us together and doing this consistently. Let me say this in closing. Minister Farrakhan put out a sermon that I want to end. He talked about the dry bones in the valley.
Don't take it back.
The only reason that the wind could blow life into the bones is because at some point they had to be connected. If the wind had blown into a disconnected body, it still wouldn't have worked. So before he prophesied to the wind, they had to first get the foot bone to connect to the ankle bone, and the ankle bone to the calf bone, and to the knee bone, and the knee bone to the thigh bone. If we are to prophesy to the wind, we must first connect this body. We must connect Eddie Long to Farrakhan and Cornel West to Elders and Lowry to Sharpton. If we can connect this body, then God will blow the breath of life into our community. But as long as we are disconnected, the wind can't blow because it's blowing on disconnected dry bones. But the good news is that we are the children of people that have been through worse than this, and we're still here. So even though I get despondent, I don't ever get depressed, because I want the world to know you won't beat us, because we're the children of those that took the worst form of slavery and brutality that ever lived, that ever existed. Our parents survived the Middle Passage. Only the strong got here, and then we lost our name, our culture, our religion, and we're still here. So you may have a momentary victory, Mr. Bush, but you don't know who we are. We're the children of Chaka Zulu. We're the children of Mary McLeod Bethune. We're the children of Marcus Garvey. We're the children of Martin Luther King. We'll be here. We were first, and we'll be last. We know who we are.
One thing I've realized from the African American community is when they are addressing issues, they don't care about the government in power. They only care about that particular issues, and they are going to make sure they push that issues to get to the person who it may concern. And that is something I have learned from them, and I'm really impressed. Not like Africa here. In Africa, we normally complain about issue when it is not, the person in power is not our tribesman. That has been the difficulties to push African forward. Most of the times, if you see somebody complaining about government, it means his tribesman is not in power, and he is doing that to make the government unpopular for his tribesman to come to power. So our political system has been saturated, and if someone is talking and you don't listen to him carefully, you may follow the wrong advice. But not like the African Americans. What I've realized is African Americans are not facing difficulties of tribalism or ethnicity. It makes them to be able to be more organized, to arrange programs and events and summits to address issues that are affecting them. And they have done that and it has really worked for them. It's not perfect, but it seems most of their issues were able to be addressed. Yes, they are still facing discrimination. They are still facing racism in their community, but it was not like how it used to be. And that is what I've been impressed with it. Please, if you want to join my Telegram group, go to my description box, click on the Telegram link. It will take you to our platform. Join us for us to discuss about the well-being of Africa and Africans in diaspora. If today is also your first time coming to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification button so that anytime I upload any great content, you will be notified. I'm always your guy, De-Graft Amoako. Thanks for watching.